So welcome everyone to the class on clothing's impact on movements. I'm Maestra Nicolosa de Eisenfear. I am currently the Chancellor of the Atlantian Academy of Dance. We promote dance across Atlantia, doing things such as organizing this dance track, hosting balls at events, and anything you could possibly want for dance. So if you need a dance master, hit me up. We'll help you get dance at your events. Today is going to be a lecture style class, so no one else needs to move, but if you're feeling up to it, you're welcome to do so. Today we're going to talk about primarily 16th century Italian discussions of dance and clothing. I will make a call out immediately that I have another class up on YouTube called How to Behave Badly According to Italian Dance Masters. There will be some crossovers between the two classes, but if you really want to get into all of the fun rules that Caroso has, I encourage you to read that instead. So I'm going to go ahead and do a quick screen share to set some context as to what we're going to be talking about today. So we are in 16th century Italy. This is the height of fashion. This is the height of culture. All other groups are learning from what Italy does. Therefore, it is critically important how we behave. And at this point, dance is not just that fun thing we do off on the side. It's not we go to the ballet and we see what's going on, or we just socially dance with a few people. This is where you are seen. This is where you can show off. This is where you could potentially be talking with the opposite gender. And so what we see is we've got dance masters who have written manuals. So we've got Caroso, and this book is in the references in your handout. And Negri, which I also have a link to, but it is a PDF only, so I'm not going to share anything. These dance masters wrote extensive notes on how to behave properly and improperly as well as part of your experience being in the ball. So when I talk about this and impact on dance movement, I'm extending what I mean by dance to the entire experience, from the point in which you arrive at the ball to how you are seated, how you ask somebody to dance, how you return to seating, and all of your behavior. Because our dance masters are talking about the etiquette, it's fair game. Let's set a little bit more context as to what's going on or what we're wearing. This is an actual woodcut out of the Caroso. There are a number of variations. I liked this one the best. So taking a look at what the woman is wearing. She has got a full dress on, farthingale, so rather wide. You'll notice there's also a train coming off the left side of it, so it is dragging it along the ground. This will come back to play later. She's got long, full sleeves going on within this, and actually a double layer sleeve. So she's got the tighter sleeve and then the more decorative outer sleeve. In her hand, she's either holding gloves or a handkerchief. I don't have the best resolution on this one, but Caroso and Negri both talk about women holding these objects. Let's take a look at the gentleman now. First off, he is wearing his cape evenly over both sides, and it goes down to about his wrist. You can see there is either fur or velvet up in the cape, and we've got a nice line in between it. He is also wearing a nice doublet and fairly short breeches. I personally like to think of this because all these Italian dances, we have all those releves, all the raising up onto your toes. Calves of steel. I encourage the calves of steel. He also has the sword at his side, which is an item we are going to be talking about, and it is hung with a hanger with two straps, and we'll take a look at that a little bit later. But it's there on his left, and he's holding the lady's right hand. And finally, in his hand, he is holding a hat. Likewise, we will be talking about more. I have, for the interest of time, have excluded shoes and fans from this, partly because for menswear, they did not talk about it in Caroso. However, they do talk about ladies' chopines. Once we actually make them, and that's going to happen soon, we'll have another class about how Chopins impact dancing. But as we're talking about the dances we're doing in Caroso, this is the image of the couple we want to be thinking about. In addition, typically when the couples are dancing, it's going to be a Caroso style ball where there's only one set of dancers out on the floor at any time. So some of the dances are going to have just a single couple, so the two dancers such as here, or you may have a dance with 4 people. But beyond that, everybody's just lining up along the edges and watching you and judging you. And so it is important to be well dressed and how that's going to affect your dance movements. Go ahead and stop sharing my screen. Pin myself. And now to the portion where we actually talk about how it all interacts. So as the handout shows, we are going to talk about 5 main items today. We're going to talk about the cloak, the hat, the gloves, the farthingale, and the sword. I have as many of these on as possible, and now that I no longer have to touch the computer, I will go ahead and put my gloves back on. What I plan to do for this class is talk about the item itself, give a chance to actually bring it to the camera, take a look at it, talk it through. We're then going to intersperse talking about the period materials and the modern items as well. So starting right out, let's talk about the cape. As we saw in the picture before, it is about halfway down, waist length, going to the elbow. At this time frame, Caroso is talking about it being worn evenly over both shoulders, specifically for the basse and grave dances. So these are notably slower dances. And in doing the reconstruction, it does work a lot better with the slower dances. That being said, Caroso also talks about how you do not want a cape of too light of material because it will fall off. So this cape happens to be silk on the outside and wool on the inside. With other research, basically any fine material, you could have double wool, you're going to have the silks, it's going to be anything that can be a little bit showy off because this is our chance to look at it. When they talk about the items that are going to fall off, he says it's about sarcenet, so very light cloth that is going to flutter in the breeze as you're doing galliards. So we may have some non-dancers here, so let's visualize what a galliard is. It is 5 steps, hop, 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 and hop. And the cloak stayed on just fine through that and actually had some very lovely movements through it. Caroso also and Negri both point out a few other ways to think about the cloak. For one, it already interacts with our sword. In fact, Caroso says it is dangerous. You are endangering lives if you let your cape get caught up in your sword handle. So if I adjust my cape slightly, it's too long, inappropriate, it could block the handle so that I could not get to my sword to defend my lady's honor or defend my own honor. Thus, we need to, as we're doing it, make sure our cape does not interfere with our sword. Secondly, this is the preferred configuration, according to Caroso, for doing the dances where you're holding a lady's hand. If you're holding 2 hands, the cape is actually adjusted and it is tied around the waist. My cape is not long enough to do that. I cannot actually get it to appropriately do that, so we're just going to visualize. Caroso also talks about how the cape should not trail on the ground. My cape, similarly, is not long enough to trail on the ground, even if I was holding it just from this portion. He says that the ladies' trains are the only things that should be trailing along the ground, most definitely not a lord's cape. So if you have a cape this length, you're not worrying about it. If you have a longer one, it is going to be of concern. Negri, in his dance manual, says You know, if your cape is going to fall off because you are doing the galliards, and those do sometimes involve spins, you are to take the wings of your cape and you are to hold your arms straight. This is very interesting because most of the time we keep our arms down, we are having them soft, good rounded elbows, and now we are holding our cape down as we are dancing. So kick, 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 and together. It does, for me, feel very awkward to do that because I'm used to more graceful arms than let me hold my clothing on. Speaking of that, one thing to note, there's no ties on my cape. When I was first looking at these capes, I thought, well, how is it going to possibly stay on? Because I'm moving around, I'm spinning, I'm moving my arms around. It actually turns out to be surprisingly easier because the fabric of my tunic here is linen with some texture, and the wool also has texture. So between the two of them, they are causing enough friction that the cape is staying on by itself, including through some impressive spins that one might see in the galliards. What is specifically said not to do, and we won't go too much into my behaving badly class, is to not wear it just over your left shoulder. Why are we saying not to do this? Because they were doing it. However, we see a lot of paintings of this time period where you do have the cape over the left shoulder. And at first I thought, well, I don't wear my hat as a baseball cap off to the side. I'm not going to fall for that style. But you know what? It looks good. I 100% understand why they did it. And because it still has that good friction to it, it likewise stays on, even with significantly less surface in order to keep it on there. And it's also fun just to put back on. Talking about how it impacts movement. One thing that I like with both this and the farthingale we'll get to later is it actually exaggerates movement so that when you're doing some shoulder rolls, you get the additional glint of light off the cape. You get the ripples through it. So as you are performing, or as the lords and period are performing, you can see that they did in fact get that little shoulder roll and additional flourishes. And again, it exaggerates everything you do, so if you are bringing your arm down, you can see it more gracefully as it goes. And so overall, it adds to the appeal of what you are doing in dance. And if that wasn't good enough reason, frankly, Caroso just comes out and says, you should never be dancing without a cape. So I look forward to our next ball, and I'm sure you will all have capes. The last thing of note, I mentioned the length on it, about wrist length. I find this very nice because, again, does not interfere with my sword, nor does it interfere with the fact that I'm taking the lady's hand here. If it were significantly longer, I'm risking having it come between me and the lady at this portion. So having it at the wrist length is the appropriate amount for it and will not actually interfere with our dancing. Next up, we are going to talk about is hats. So in the diagram, we see Caroso having a hat. So I'm going to bring this up and ruin all of my nice placement on it. So this hat I made for basically doing specifically this. It is shaped much like the Caroso hat in the fact that it's rounded up top, and I don't know how well that's coming through, but it is held only up by the pleating within it. And that pleating is done, yes, I'm showing you the gross inside of my hat. The pleating is done by gathering just the items. It does not have any other rigid structure to it. The brim is not rigid, as we see in the pictures. The brim is actually even tinier than this one. I made it a little bit bigger, but it is just structured with the pleats there, and we see this both on Negri and Caroso in their portraits. the pattern for being able to make this is in Janet Arnold, referenced in the material. So with hats, I mentioned earlier that it is not just the dancing that we are considering, it is the entire portion of coming up, honoring the lady. We have long heard about we must doff our hat in order to make appropriate honor to our partner. And Caroso writes 3 pages about how to properly doff the hat. Check out my other class in order to get more insight about this, or it's just a fascinating read. Negri restrains himself. He only writes 1 entire page of how to take off your hat. But roughly done, you take it off with your right hand. You keep your gross inside of the hat down facing your hand, and you swap it off to your left. Couple things to note. I mentioned, keeping the inside facing you. If you have a hat that is not rigid, that is much harder because I'm having to control it down through. It's a little bit wobbly. Frankly, I'm hitting on items. If you have a rigid hat, and this one I've borrowed from Mistress Grace, it actually comes off and floats down much easier. So as we are doing the dance, what type of hat you have also makes an impact. Once you get it down, notably it's in your right hand at this point, but you need to dance with your lady in the right. So you swap it over to your left in order to dance with the lady in the right. We see from the woodcuts of Caroso that they in fact have their hats down and off. There is one where he is taking 2 ladies' hands, the hat is back on, but otherwise the hat is down in the hand. Oh wait, we're all of a sudden now down with the sword. Life is starting to get complicated because we're going to have to control the sword and properly hold our hat. So gripping both as we're going through it. And so now as you're thinking about dancing, you're controlling both items and having your lovely lady in your right arm. Another item that Caroso notes is that it is worth great honor to honor your partner, to do the reverence, but not too much. There are a number of dances in this time period where you do a lot of honors. Gracca amoroso, you are honoring and doing reverences a lot. If in that dance, every time you did an honor, you did it with your hat, Caroso actually specifies that this is ill manners. You are trying too hard in order to put the hat on and off. And you should, in fact, just do the honor with the hat at the beginning and the end of the dance. So not every time we're doing the reverenzas are we dealing with the hat. Some items to note as I've practiced with it. I already mentioned about the rigidity. Another item is just the practice involved of getting it up with one hand, and it's going to change based on every single hat I have. Beyond that, I don't actually notice a difference personally for dancing with the hat. Part of this is I have ballet training in my background, good posture. I'm not necessarily doing quick movements with my head. It actually stays on for me quite well. I think if you were to have perhaps poor posture, looking down more, it does have a tendency to want to fall off. But for me, it feels very natural to have it there. The hardest part is really just during the reverenza. The next item we're going to talk about is the sword. We've hinted at it a couple times, how it is dangerous with your cape, how we're having to hold our hat nearby. Let's talk about the sword. So for today, I am wearing a cross sword and borrowing one from Master Joffrey. Thank you very much. And it's going to be sitting on my left side. Properly in period, what it's going to be is, and we see this in the Caroso paintings or woodcuts, is you're going to have the belt and you're going to have the sword hanger, and this is 95% done, but not all the way done. And we're going to have this hanging around down on the side. In the woodcuts, these are thinner, but it is the same idea. This does mean you end up having a belt along, and I personally have theories about that with what to do with our gloves later, but this is more going to be the style of what you're going to be seeing and dancing with at this point. Items to note: you've got your hilt that it could be catching up in your cape. And also lengthwise, this sword is 39 inches long. Works okay for me because I'm reasonably tall and can control it well. In period, the swords would be about 36 inches long. Beyond that, you risk them being broken off and being a nuisance with them. What sort of nuisance are we thinking you could be with the sword besides, doing all the normal fighting? Well, if I'm standing sideways here, see how far that goes out? I'm going to potentially be hitting people. If I am in tight spaces, such as at the ball, it is out there and could be in the way. So what Caroso talks about is keeping control of the sword at all times. This means we have our left hand on the sword, potentially also with our hat in our hand, to control it. He specifically talks about not letting it wave around wildly, which I'll take my hand off, spin around, and there it goes, waving about wildly and showing that I do not have good reading because I have not been able to keep hold of it. In our local practice experiments, we actually tend to only do the sword getup for the Italian dances, for the slower dances. Because while it is easy to hold on to it, control it in those dances, English country dances were a whole fun experiment. Arming right side, not a big deal. Arming left side, okay, I'm spinning around potentially with a very quick dance with my sword going. We did do experiments of could you cross and hold? You can, it doesn't look as elegant, so we have focused mainly on the right side. Another item to consider as we are dancing with our sword is we are controlling it. It is still fairly far out. So bringing it up and in order to keep it more contained as you are working in tight spaces. Caroso also specifically mentions that in his book of keeping it in. This became a very natural way as we were dancing, once we got good at it, of being like, oh yeah, up and in, so I'm not hitting people. That being said, we absolutely hit people a number of the early times as we did not remember how far the sword was. And by we, I mean me and some of our other crew. The other item of the sword, which is one of my favorites, is in Caroso, he talks about Capitano from Commedia and not doing your reverence so that your sword tip points towards the sky. And this is a common picture you will see within it. Notably, I'm also very much doing my reverence incorrectly to be able to do this. And because the reverence being a core part of dance, we talk about it. In addition, Caroso says, do not let the hilt of your sword fall out, which I have gotten far too good at doing. And that is a showing of if you do your reverenza improperly by leaning over, it is going to be more likely to fall out. If you are doing your reverenza properly, keeping your body up and down, keeping your hand on your hilt, your sword should not fall out, and you will not, in fact, be laughed at. So within our experiments, we really are thinking about controlling it. And the last item with our sword, and this baffled me for a little while because I didn't have a nice chair initially to sit in, is how do I sit with the sword in my chair? And to do so properly, you're not letting it just, hang out to the side, we're not gonna hit people with it, but instead bring it around front in order to sit with it properly and keep it out of the way. This sword being 39 inches actually makes it a little bit tricky, but I also do not want it just facing back out. In Caroso, he talks about how if you are as a lord are seated on a bench or on a stool and another lord comes to sit with you, you should in fact share your seat. But in theory, the second lord is also wearing a sword and having it out to the left, and so it'll be important to bring it up and around front. Next and last for the men, gloves. We know that they were wearing gloves in the balls because they talk about how to take them off when a lady approaches you to dance. These are not period gloves, and the really nice pair of gloves I do have, I don't want to bite, and you'll understand in just a second. But think, leather gloves, nice cloth gloves. Caroso specifically talks about not having them too tight because you need to be able to take them off in a reasonably expeditious way. So a lady has come and approached you and has asked you to dance. At that point, you take off your gloves to dance. There are two main areas he talks about. They should not take longer than an Ave Maria to take off. So, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. These gloves work. I was able to do it in less than an Ave Maria. For what it's worth, Ave Maria takes about 15 seconds to say. So if your gloves are tighter than that, you need to get looser gloves. The other item Caroso says not to do, and frankly, the masks currently help me not do this. Take off the glove by biting it. He specifically talks about how a finger could get caught and ripped from your glove, and now you have a finger trailing from your mouth, and you do not actually have your glove off. And so that is most inappropriate. For ladies, the gloves are going up your sleeve in order to contain them. This is where we get the joyous passage to make sure they stay in there tight, because if a lady drops a glove, all the lords bestir themselves and run like a flock of starlings to retrieve it, which is just great imagery. Lords, I read the Caroso a number of times and actually did not see any reference of where the gloves go. I mentioned earlier with the hanger that you have the belt. It is my assumption that the gloves get tucked in the belt. That's what I would do. When we get to the discussion portion, I would love to know if anybody else has other theories as to where the gloves go. We looked over the woodcuts in detail. We don't see them in the hat. We don't see where they actually are, but we do know they were there. We know that they don't disappear because Caroso talks about 3 different ways you can sit with your sword, and one of them, you actually rest your hands with your gloves out. You can also do it, have a flower in it, and look elegant that way. So your gloves are still off, and they are specifically arm outstretched and out, and we're leaning on our left side because this is the epitome of grace and luxury. For the final item, I'm going to actually switch into women's gear real quick. Do this in the appropriate way. I'm going to talk about large skirts and farthingales. This is where I have actually the most experience. I've been doing dancing with the farthingale for about 5 years on and off at practice. I'm choosing, for expedience of time, not to put the additional layers on. It takes about 10 minutes with 1 to 2 ladies to get me into my full Elizabethan outfit. So for this class, we're just going to talk about the farthingale and the hoop skirt. So as we mentioned earlier, we are much wider in this. It's going to have multiple layers over it, so we're going to have a lot more weight on it, but it is still going to move fairly well. Within this, Caroso and Negri and Arbeau and so many dance masters talk specifically about not raising your skirt. If you all thought that I was going to teach a class and not raise my skirt because I was in men's, out of luck. He specifically talks about not raising your skirt. However, he does acknowledge that in order for ladies to get through areas, you may need to raise it at times. But the suggestion is lower down and move that way so that you are, unlike me, not showing anything improper by doing the raising. He also specifically talks about, ladies, you should be sitting in the middle of the chair as you sit down so that the farthingale does not raise and lift and show any of your feet in doing so. This also requires you to have good posture within it. I will say, as having worn the farthingale a lot, with the bum roll, with the corset, I don't want to lean back. As we see, it is rising up, but it is also just not comfortable. So I much prefer to sit in the middle of the chair, which is the same as Caroso suggests. How do we move backwards with the farthingale? Caroso specifically talks about doing so in a strutting a little bit, so strutting kind of back and moving the hips in order to move it backwards. For the ladies, we have the train going on. That's actually going to push the train out of the way in order to do this. We did have some experiments where having a little bit of train, it does work by shifting it around. Notably, my skirt's moving a lot more because I don't have the weight on it. Other experiments that we have done with this is I actually do have to change how I am performing dances when I have the farthingale on. In Pizzeria d'Amore, the step is hop, hop, heel, toe, heel, toe. Well, we just all saw what that did. It did a beautiful accordion, which is not proper, and we don't want our skirts reacting that way. Instead, I will change the choreography to do heel raises for the ladies. So the men, you still get to show off your calves of steel. As a lady, I am just raising and lowering in order to do this. Another way, as a woman moving in my farthingale, I have to be very thoughtful of how I am stepping, because I am here causing my skirt to bell, and that is not attractive unless I want it to be. That being said, in SCA events where it's a little warm, I will absolutely do this on purpose in order to cool myself down, because it's getting that air movement through there. But as we are doing the dance, we want to be graceful, and we want to be moving smoothly and floating so that the skirt is not belling out. Another experiment that we learned with these large skirts, where Lady Morgan and myself were both wearing our farthingales and wearing skirts with velvet on the outside, where we had two gentlemen with swords. We actually had to allow more space in the dance as well, because as Morgan and I would move past each other, the velvet on our skirts would catch and cause the nice split skirts to come open, and thus revealing more of our underskirt than we were necessarily comfortable in sharing in that way. And so we actually, for Pizzeria d'Amore, once again, where the two ladies are crossing each other, we had to circle out a little bit more in order to be able to effectively cross beyond each other. Notably, the gentlemen are on each side wearing their swords, and so we are making sure that we're not moving far enough out to interfere with any of that. Just like the cape, the farthingale is going to exaggerate movements, both good and bad. So if we are doing something on purpose, such as the continenze, where we're going up and down, we may want to see a little bit of the swing to know that we have done the continenza up and down. However, done appropriately, and you really get that hip jutted out, you're going to see a lot more sway. So if you think that, oh, I have a large skirt, no one can see my footwork, I can just be sloppy with it, not the case. You've got people who know what they're looking for, are going to see how the skirt moves as to how you rose up and came down. It's swaying at an angle. And you also see, if you're kicking the skirt, the way it works. So you're going to have to keep those footwork and feet small as you're moving through it. Finally, in the picture you see me in the dress, I've got full robe on. My arms are seated this way. It is so incredibly comfortable with the bum roll to just have my arms resting like this. And I find myself, as I am dancing, also resting my arms. So I have to consciously think, as I am dancing, put my arms back down in the appropriate position. I guess I'm a lady now. I'm going this way, but I'm so tempted to raise it down, but I need to like put my other arm down to be in the proper position. The areas that we didn't talk about today that I look forward to future classes, the fan. I did not actually see any specific documentation in Caroso talking about the fan. However, in Negri, there are two pictures where it is clearly seen that the lady is holding a fan. I've likewise taken a class at Known World Dance on how to incorporate the fan into it. I personally like using it as a way to exaggerate movement and looking away, and I'm ready to come back. And for this one, it is key to have a fan that can move quite adept. I also specifically chose not to do foot or shoes within this. Do look for us to come back with a new Chopin's class later. But big shout out to my local Eyes and Fear dancers who did many of these experiments with us, notably Master Joffrey, Danya Costanza, and Lady Morgan, who all kitted up multiple times, worked through these, we ran into each other, and really worked them out. But the rest of the SM dancers helped provide additional challenges as we were moving through it. And also to everyone who came to the book club, where we read through Caroso and really dived into these discussions. So we've got about 10 minutes left. And so what I'd love to do is, we've got a great set of folks on this call who have danced for a long time, have a lot of knowledge. I'd love to hear what you all have in terms of experience dancing with these additional items.
The most common side effects were nausea, stomach pain, and indigestion. With the Nurtec ODT.
Has anybody had a chance to dance with swords or capes or routinely with hats?
I don't generally have garb that has a train, but I've seen Judith of Northumbridge dance with a long train many times. So the short train, the movement of the feet may work. I've seen her use her heel to push the train out of the way, but I've also seen her, when it's an active dance, actually pick the train up in her arm to get it out of the way. I don't know if that's documentable, but that's what she has to do.
So Caroso does specifically say not to kick the dress, and he says, don't stretch like a cat in order to move it around. So it's, thinking your cat's stretching out this way. I am thoroughly of the opinion, if it's written down to not do something, that means people are doing it.
Right.
So I think it's entirely period. He also says not to lift the dress in order to do that, which means, again, people were doing it. It feels like the right thing to do in order to keep the dance moving.
And if you're doing an active dance with a long train, people will step on it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. People will also step on the farthingale and hoop skirts.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Yep. They do not necessarily get out of the way as much as one would think. They do give you additional breath, but not always the full amount. Are there questions? Other experiences?
Is there anything?
Anything surprise folks about the additional items one would be wearing?
Any instruction for women and headwear?
Specifically in Caroso, it was not addressed. And in the woodcuts we see, they are not wearing headwear in this case. What he does specify is mantles for ladies, so basically a shorter cape. And in talking about those, is actually more about an invitation to dance or not. So ladies, if you continue to wear your mantle and you sit in the second row of seating, you are specifically saying that you would not like to be invited to dance. If you take off your mantle, that is an indication you would in fact like to dance. But there is nothing specific about women and headwear in this material.
Hey, I was going to add one thing with the hats that was an issue with some of the dances when you're under people's arms through an arch or something. Yeah, need to be very cognizant, particularly when one of our dancers is relatively short. So I'm relatively tall, and you add the hat on top of that, and yeah, it can be embarrassing. Um,
That is a great point. I mean, this hat is not exactly short. I mean, it's, you know, good half arm's length on it. So yes, it could in fact get knocked off, and we have done so in dance practice. Thoughts, questions?
This was fun. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you all for coming. I hope you have a great rest of university, and I'm happy to stick around and chit chat about this, anything else that you would like to. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much